Welcome to my Switching, Routing, and Wireless Essentials course. This should be the CCNA version 7 curriculum. This is the second of 3 courses. Moving forward, we have DHCPv6. So in previous chapters we talked about door method, how we actually got our addresses. Well, with DHCPv6, we have a little bit more. So with stateful DHCP, this does not require SLAAC, while stateless DHCP does. So DHCP comes in 2 main flavors, stateful, stateless. Stateless will track information, stateless doesn't track information, where stateful does track information. So regardless of what we're doing, there is at least a basic understanding of how DHCP operates. So the host will send a router solicitation. The router will respond with a router advertisement. If there is a DHCP server, the router advertisement will say, forward the rest of these questions to the DHCP server. So it will solicit to all DHCP servers. That will be a DHCPv6 solicit message. The DHCP version 6 server will respond with an advertisement message. That'll be a unicast address. The client will then request or provide an information request back to the server, also being unicast. The last step is the server will reply with the unicast address, verifying the address. So servers to the client DHCP messages will all be using UDP. And this happens over port 546, while client to server communication is all going to be done off of port 547. Server to client responses, 546. Client to server responses, 547. Again, both UDP. Alright, so let's go and look at the stateless DHCP operations. So, same thing, PC comes online. Here we have a router advertisement with the A and O flag set. Basically that tells the PC to reach out to the DHCP server stateless and to grab the information. Again, the M flag is set to 0 by default. The A flag says use SLAAC. The O flag basically informs the host to seek additional information from the DHCP server. So how do we enable a stateless DHCP server on an interface? Basically we say IPv6 ND other TAC config TAC flag, and basically this will set the O flag to 1. The highlighted area of the output will show the router advertisement message, and you can see that the auto configuration is enabled. That's the A flag, and the contact the DHCP server to obtain other information, the O flag, is also then set. You can also use the no IPv6 ND other flag configuration to reset the interface so that it only uses the default SLAAC option, the O flag being set, nothing else. So now that we've talked about stateless, now we have to talk about stateful. That means that the M flag is set to on. The A and O are set to off. That means the host needs to contact a stateful DHCP server to obtain address information. So again, router advertisement message will be sent to the client. The client will receive the RA. The RA will say, contact this server. The client will contact that server and will obtain the information it needs from the server. Remember that the DHCP server is stateful, and that means it will maintain a list of address bindings. So how do we actually enable stateful DHCP server on an interface? We can set an IP ND manage configure flag, and again we start seeing that host will use DHCP to obtain routable addresses. That sets the M flag to being set. So now we talked about this, how do we configure it? So big part of this is understanding how to configure it. we have three specific areas we have to talk about: server, client, and a relay agent. Again, the server provides the stateless or stateful services. The client will basically be the interface acquiring the address automatically or dynamically, and the relay agent will actually provide bypass to that layer 3 boundary to forward that service to another network. The 5 main steps to configuring a stateless DHCP server. This is very similar to DHCPv4. Turn on IPv6 routing. Set up your IPv6 DHCP pool name. So instead of doing an exclude like you would with DHCPv4, here you'd be doing just going directly to your pool name. You could set the DNS server and the domain name, and you bind the interface using a DHCP server pool name and an interface. Again, we have a lab going through this, so we can see the step-by-step configuration. How do you set up a client? Turn on IPv6 unicast routing. You would then enable IPv6 on a interface. You can configure the client to use SLAAC using IPv6 address auto configuration. That will use SLAAC. You can verify it by doing a show IPv6 interface brief. Or you can verify that the client router is receiving other necessary DHCP information with a show IPv6 DHCP interface and that interface. That will confirm DHCP option information such as the DNS server and domain name that has been received by the client. So again, that's stateless. How do we configure it to be stateful? So, with stateful address configuration, pretty similar steps. You set up IPv6 unicast routing, you set up your pool. Here in the pool, we'll also use some other options, including the address prefix, the DNS and IP addresses, default gateway, and the normal information that you'd be putting there. You would bind the pool to an interface. So again, manually changing the M flag from 0 to 1, you'd have to do the IPv6 ND manage config flag. To manually change the A flag from 1 to 0, you'd be using the IPv6 ND prefix default no auto config. That basically says don't use SLAAC, and that has set up the DHCP server to be stateful on that device. On the client side, pretty similar steps. Set up IPv6 unicast routing, go to the interface, type IPv6 enable. There you'll be using the IPv6 address DHCP on whatever interface command you want. That will then assign an address. You can verify by doing a show IPv6 interface brief or a show IPv6 DHCP interface and whatever interface you actually want to look at. So again, pretty similar steps when we're talking stateless versus stateful. And again, we have labs covering how to configure this, because going through the steps doesn't really help unless we configure it in a lab as well. So how do we verify? Again, show IPv6 DHCP pool will give us our pool details. We can use a show IPv6 DHCP binding to see a little bit more binding detail. That's going to be the address and MAC addresses and other specific details. Lastly, how do we set up a relay agent? Pretty similar to how we set up IPv4 relay agents with helper IPs. Here we go to whatever interface we want to be listening on, and we set up a DHCP relay destination, and you give it the next hop, and you also give it the exit interface. Here the next hop typically will be done via its global unicast address, not its link local address. How do we verify? Same thing, show IPv6 DHCP interface or show IPv6 DHCP bindings. Questions, concerns, please reach out. Thank you.